Great, all set? Okay. Morning, guys. Morning. How are you? Thanks for having me. My name is Michael Page, and I am right now a meteorologist, which is why I'm here to talk to you guys about the weather. And I'm actually from Hingham. So I went to South Elementary School several years ago and came to East while South was being redone. So when I was in East, it was very old and not nearly as nice. So you guys have a much better school. So we're going to talk about some weather today, talk a little bit about what I do on TV as a meteorologist, and I'd be happy to take your questions as we go along, okay? So just raise your hand, and I won't be able to get to everybody, but I'll get to as many as I can, all right? So let's get started first of all. Anyone recognize this picture where that was taken? In the back? What'd you say? It's nearby. This one's in Cohasset. So when you drive near, exactly. So this is Mine at Light in Cohasset. So when you, yeah, exactly. So when you go out, you can see it during big storms, the big waves crashing over. So things like this is what got me really excited about the weather when I was your age and a little bit older too. When I'd see the big storms and the waves crashing ashore and over the lighthouse, it was really lots of excitement. And that's how I got interested in the weather. And in 2009, I graduated from Hingham High, and I did the weather there over the loudspeaker every morning. Total weather nerd, major nerd status, but you know what? Really loved it. And it actually got me a job one day, so look at that. So I went to Penn State, and I graduated there in 2012, and I was a meteorology major. Means all I did was study the weather. But interestingly enough, you have a lot of calculus and a lot of physics when you want to become a meteorologist. You might think, hey, just look at the sky, right? No, lots of math and lots of science. And while I was in college, I interned in Boston at WCVB, so Channel 5, if anybody watches Channel 5 at night with their parents. Harvey Leonard, okay? So I worked with Harvey for 2 years. Great mentor to me. We still keep in touch all the time. And it's really important to have people like that if you're interested in getting into a field like TV, to have someone that can kind of guide you along the way and answer your questions. And then most recently, I've been the morning meteorologist in Burlington, Vermont. So we cover all of Vermont, New Hampshire, northern New York, Montreal as well. So when you go skiing, sometimes you maybe would have seen me, didn't even know it. But I was doing mornings there. So when I woke up at 8:30 this morning, I was very excited that I wasn't waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, which is my normal wake-up time, and then on air from 5 to 9 a.m. So it's kind of nice to be up a little bit later. Anyway, that's about the TV stuff. But before you can get on TV, of course, you have to know all about the weather. And you start with the basics. And it sounds like you guys maybe have done a little bit of weather, maybe know a little bit. Kind of, sort of?
Some were mixed back, some of us have some.
All right, so this will be a little intro, maybe a review for some of you. So let's start with the basics. When you're watching the news at night with your parents, you might see a map that looks like this. Kind of look familiar? See some H's, some L's. All right, so this is what we call a surface front. And this shows you, a surface map I should say, this shows you different fronts, pressure systems, gives you the broad overview of what's going on with the weather. So you can look at it real quickly and figure out what's going on. So the things you see on that map tell you different aspects of the weather. For example, pressure, that big blue H that we saw on that map just a moment ago, so that stands for high pressure. High pressure means good weather. So when you see the blue H, you know it's going to be kind of quiet, fair weather, maybe some sunshine, and you get clockwise winds. All right, so around a big H, you get the winds going around clockwise. And when that happens, the air is sinking in the atmosphere. So the air is kind of coming down like this. And that means you don't get clouds to form. Because for clouds to form, you need air going up. All right? So on the other hand, when you have one of those L's, low pressure, and the way you kind of remember this, or at least you can, H, happy, good weather, right? L, kind of lousy weather. That's where you get your storms. And again, the low pressure is what really gets me excited about the weather. Maybe not so much you, or maybe not after this winter. But when you get the L, that means you get a storm coming. The winds are going counterclockwise, and you have that rising air. So if you need to remember one thing about clouds, it's that the air has to be going up for clouds to form. And that's when you get your storms. All right? Questions so far? Good. All right. So remember I told you about the winds going different directions around the highs and the lows? Well, why do we care about that? Because that basically drives everything in our atmosphere. You have wind that blows around a high clockwise, and it blows out of the area of high pressure. Think of a big bucket of water, okay? So you've got one bucket that's overflowing, and you've got one bucket that's like halfway full. It's going to go from the full bucket to the not so full bucket, right? If you have them next to each other, because it's spilling out, it's overflowing into the lower water. Does that make sense? Same thing in the atmosphere. So pressure blows from high to low, and this is why we get the wind. So a lot of people wonder, well, why is it windy? Or you don't really know. Like the trees are moving, and is that causing the wind? No, it's actually the pressure. So it's blowing from high to low. And you can just kind of remember it by thinking about that water. One's overflowing, it's going to go into the lower spot. And these are all very important when we start thinking about the storms, again, which is kind of the exciting part of weather. So when this happens, you get the high and the low. Anyone heard of the jet stream? Okay, good, perfect. Who can kind of tell me what the jet stream is? Anyone? All right, how about right here? You want to give it a shot?
Yeah, it's kind of like the flow where the wind is going, I think.
Yeah, perfect. It's like a highway in the atmosphere. Perfect. So it's just a big ribbon of air, and it's moving really fast. About 20,000 feet, 30,000 feet, so roughly the height at which you're flying in an airplane. So think of how high you go when you're on vacation flying, right? You're really high up. So the planes actually try to fly with the jet stream because it's going so fast. So if you're flying from California to Boston, for example, the pilot's going to try to find the jet stream because that's going to get you to Boston faster because the wind is blowing so fast. So have you ever noticed how you can get home faster than if you're going to California? Maybe, well, you pick up like an hour or so. That's because when you're going to California, you're fighting the wind, the jet stream, and then when you're coming back, you can kind of ride it. So it separates the cold and the warm air, and this year, it's been kind of cold, right? Kind of snowy. So the jet stream has been configured just like this. See that green arrow right there? So the jet stream has been going just off to our south. That means cold air drags down from the north. You get cold, high pressure, and you get little areas of low pressure that follow that highway in the sky. So the low pressure will follow the jet stream because that's kind of the road for the weather, and it all moves from west to east. And when those little areas of low pressure come by, hits the cold, boom, you get your big snowstorms. And this winter, you've just lived through something incredibly historic. You'll never forget this winter, and we probably won't see something like it again. If we do, we're very unlucky. But this is a crazy period of time. Just in the past month or so, or in a month span, 60 plus inches of snow in the city of Boston is incredible. You guys have so much more snow than we have in Vermont. Anyway, so the jet stream is critical, and those are the things we're looking at when we're talking about these big storms. Maybe you've heard some of the meteorologists around here saying it's the jet stream that has just been locked in place. And it's because that highway hasn't moved that it's just bringing one storm after the other right towards us. So along with those storms, you get different fronts, and you've probably heard about this too. Cold front, sound kind of familiar? It looks like this blue one with the jagged edges, little triangles there. So this means you have colder air on the way, and it often brings stormy weather. Cold fronts are kind of beefy. They're very strong, okay? And that's why they're pointy edges. That's how you can remember it. So when colder air is coming in, clashes with the warm air, and this is where you get your thunderstorms, your storms, your precipitation. That all comes with a cold front. On the other hand, when you have a warm front, what do you think happens? Warm air is coming in, right? Makes sense. But see how there are little kind of circles on the warm front there? Notice the difference? Warm air is kind of lazy. Cold air always wins out. So the warm air actually kind of goes over the cold air, and it takes a while for things to warm up. So you don't get dramatic thunderstorms. You don't get tornadoes. You don't get the real exciting weather with a warm front because it's just lazier. So cold front's going to win. The warm front, it'll just take its sweet time. Now sometimes you have a little bit of a combination. You get what's called a stationary front. So you have cold air on one side, warm air on the other, and stationary means what? Not moving, right? So stationary front means it's going to sit there. This is where you get a lot of flooding. So if you have a stationary front that just kind of sets up right over you, because nothing's changing, it could keep raining and raining and raining, and this is where you get a lot of flooding. Or during one of our snowstorms a couple of months ago, remember there were some towns that got like 3 feet of snow? Remember that? And a couple towns away, maybe you got 15 inches. Still a lot of snow, but 15 inches, go a couple towns over and you get 35 inches or something crazy like that. You get one of these stationary fronts that sets up, and it's often right along the coastline where we live because you have the water providing kind of that warmer air blowing in, and then you have the very cold air inland. So we have that cold air meeting kind of the warmer, and it's relative, warmer ocean air, closer to 32 degrees. When those hit each other, you get one of these stationary fronts, and that's a focus for extremely heavy snow. And it's extremely difficult to pinpoint where that's going to form, which is why you have the meteorologists saying, one town might get 15 inches, the other town might get 25. And you might say, well, why can't you tell me exactly how much snow Hingham's going to get and how many snow days I'm going to have? But it's very hard to figure out exactly where that front is going to stop, and it's just going to dump snow, because that's what it does. Dump snow. 4 inches of snow in 1 hour sometimes with these things. Pretty crazy stuff. Okay, and then you get kind of like a combination here. That pink front is called an occluded front. And again, remember I said the warm front was kind of lazy? Cold front stronger, beefier. So the cold front will just come in and will eat up the warm front. And eventually when that happens, you get something that's called occluded. It means the storm is basically as strong as it's going to get. So that gets purple. We don't see those quite as often. Questions? Okay. All right, and we just talked about this a little bit. These localized fronts in the summertime. Anyone know sea breeze? That sound familiar? Or anyone go out on the water in your boats a lot and you'll notice it's so much cooler right on the harbor, right? And then you go just a couple of miles inland and it gets so much warmer. And that's what we call a sea breeze front. So again, you have that air blowing in off the water, and that's much different than the air coming inland. So you get one of these very localized fronts, and here in Hingham we get this a lot. So in the spring and summer times it brings the cooler air in, and in the wintertime we get kind of the warmer air off of the water. So it goes both ways. All right, cloud types. This is something that's actually pretty cool, and this is how you can sort of predict the weather on your own. So look at this chart right here. Anyone want to tell me which clouds, if you were to look, would mean there could be some changes in the weather in the next 24, 36 hours? Anybody? Okay, right here. Cumulonimbus? Yeah. Okay, good guess. So that's this one right here. See this big cloud? So that means that you actually have big storms right now. That's where you get your tornadoes, your big severe thunderstorms. Those can go up to 50,000 feet high. 50,000 feet. Remember how high we were when we were saying we were flying in an airplane? 20 to 30,000 feet. So that's higher than when you're going to fly in an airplane. And this is where the planes and the pilots really have to avoid those storms. Can't fly through that. You get very strong winds, you get hail, and things like that. So that means you have a big storm, could get a tornado. All right, anyone else want to guess about changes in the weather right here in the blue? You're close. Yep. As soon as you see that cirro in front, that means that you have some changes coming. So those are really high. Cirrus clouds in the upper right-hand corner there, that's kind of the typical one that you'll see when there are changes coming. A cold front might be coming in. You'll see that like a day before. So if you're at the bus stop one morning and you see those high clouds, they're made of ice because they're so high in the atmosphere. They're just freezing, okay? So that's all ice, and that means there are some changes coming. So we talked about that, the cumulonimbus. And then let's just say kind of like the cumulus ones way over here on the left. So it's kind of like a cumulus day. We'll see some cumulus this afternoon, just kind of like the puffy ones. It means fair weather, not a whole lot going on right now. When it rains, you'll get kind of the stratus clouds, just kind of gray and flat. You know those, they're very low, not much texture to them. So all of these different clouds kind of give you an idea of what's happening with the weather. And of course, we have to predict the weather several days in advance, so that doesn't always help us. But when you walk outside, you can at least see and kind of get a sense of what's going on. Cloud questions? Good? Okay. All right, now here's the tricky part. So here's precipitation, and again, this is something that we haven't had to deal with a whole lot this winter, because it was basically just one, snow, right? So it's easy when it's snow. Means it's below 32 degrees at the ground, in the middle of the atmosphere, and way up in the cloud. All right, so that's easy, below 32 the whole way. But it gets a little bit messy sometimes. Okay, so what's this one here? Now we have this little bit of a warm layer in between. All right, so have you kind of heard like a little pinging on your window maybe sometimes? Little ice balls will hit in the winter. You kind of hear that kind of dinging off the side of the house? Does that sound familiar? Okay, so that's called sleet. So what's happening there is that at the cloud, where all of this starts, it's cold, 32 degrees. But then it goes through a little warm layer and you get a little melting. So now you suddenly have raindrops. But then it's really cold right at the ground, and it freezes again. So that's where you get those tiny little balls of ice. We call that sleet. So kind of think of this as like a hamburger or something like that. Cold bun on the bottom, on the top, and then you've got kind of like a thin little sliver of meat in the middle there, okay? And the meat's obviously warmer, remember that. Okay. But we have this other thing. See how the red just got a lot bigger? So now you have like a big burger in the middle, okay? And it's still cold in the cloud, so it's freezing. Melts a lot in the middle, but then it's just a little bun on the bottom. And when you're standing on the ground, it looks like it's raining out, but if you go try to walk around, you might slip. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Or your car, if you go out to your parents' car, it's like all caked in ice, and you can't quite get in. So that's called freezing rain. And this is really dangerous because this is when it looks like it's raining, you're on the highway, you think, oh great, I can drive normal highway speed, but it's just a little coating of ice, and you lose control of your car, and this is where a lot of the accidents happen. And this is pretty hard to forecast too, because it's only cold right at the surface. Anyone seen this before? Okay, a couple of you, right. So again, that's really kind of the hard thing to forecast, and it doesn't take much freezing rain to cause problems. Okay, so that gets us through precip. Now we get to the good stuff. This is where we get a lot of questions. You know, everyone has a little story. All right, so thunderstorms. First of all, this picture was taken just on the North Shore in Marblehead. I'm not sure if anyone's been there. Kind of near Salem, things like that. But look at that big bolt of lightning. Beautiful picture, huh? So obviously thunderstorms come with lightning, gusty winds, sometimes hail, maybe a tornado. And remember, which front are these going to come along? Cold front? Because that's strong, right? So those strong cold fronts are going to come and slam in here and bring us the summer thunderstorms. And interestingly enough, okay, we hear a lot about the lightning, right? Hear a lot about tornadoes. But look at that. Flooding is the #1 killer when it comes to thunderstorms. So if a thunderstorm comes through, most people, if unfortunately they die because of weather, actually die because of flooding. Sound kind of strange? Not really what you would expect? So if you were to guess, all right, let's guess here. If you're driving your car, let's say you go over a flooded roadway. You know, you see a lot of water on the road. You might think, oh, great, we can just kind of like splash through. How fun. How much water do you think it will take to lift your car up and potentially float it away? Any guesses? I'll give you a guess. Well, I'll give you a hint for your guesses. It will be feet. All right, let's try right here in the red. Okay, not a bad guess. No, that's a good guess. Anyone else want to give it a shot? How about over there in the black and white? 5? Okay, so how about like right in between? Only takes about 2 feet of water flowing pretty quickly to maybe wash your car away. And that's where a lot of people get into trouble. Because you're driving along and you think, great, I'm in an SUV, right? I can just kind of plow right through it. But you can't see where the bottom of the water is. Only takes 2 feet to kind of pick your car up and maybe float it away. And that's where a lot of people get in trouble. Because of these storms, obviously they do come with the hail, the lightning, and maybe tornadoes too. So you get severe thunderstorm warnings and watches. You heard your iPhones or your parents' iPhones buzz a lot in the summertime with that like big beeping noise when there are warnings issued. They started doing this pretty recently. So when there's a severe thunderstorm warning, that's telling you, okay, there's a storm here or coming. A watch means, okay, there could be a storm in the next couple of hours. Just kind of keep an eye to the sky. Warning means you have to seek shelter right now. Severe, all that means is that you're going to have winds over 58 miles per hour. And think about how fast that is. 58 miles per hour. Think of how fast you drive on the highway, about 60-ish, faster in Massachusetts probably. Hail over 1 inch in diameter. Anyone know how wide 1 inch is? Anybody want to guess? Think about that. All right, give it a shot right here in the blue. Can you think of any object that's about 1 inch, if you had to guess? Yeah, any idea? Okay, so like think of a coin, right? Which coin do you think would be close to 1 inch right here? Bigger than that. Green?
Quarter.
Good. So that's a quarter size hail. So think of quarters. Pull out your spare change and look at a quarter. All of that ice. That means it's a severe thunderstorm if that's falling out of the sky. But it gets a lot bigger than that. Not necessarily around here, sometimes, but in the plains, have you heard of like Tornado Alley? In Oklahoma, Kansas. So hail there can get much, much bigger. Softball size hail, grapefruit size hail. Okay, think about a softball, right? Softball's big. That's big. And when that's ice, and remember, you're not just like casually throwing it to your friend across the yard, okay? This is falling out of the sky from tens of thousands of feet up. That will really hurt. That's why it's incredibly important that you go inside when these storms are coming. And a lot of cars get very damaged. We had a storm in Vermont this past summer that came through with just, and I say just, but quarter size hail. And, excuse me, a lot of the car dealerships were totally decimated. Because think about it, all their cars are outside, right? Big hailstorm comes by and now every car suddenly has a ton of little marks in it from all this ice that fell out of the sky. So it does a lot of damage, and obviously it hurts. Questions about thunderstorms? Right here?
I know, like, one time I was in Florida and we saw, like, purple lightning. What makes lightning?
Okay, that's a good question. And you kind of see the purple here, too. So a lot of it has to do with what's in the clouds. So in the clouds, you have liquid, the rain, and then you also have the hail. So typically when you have the hail, have you ever heard kind of people talk about the green sky before a tornado? I don't know, maybe you've heard that. Okay, so sometimes people talk about green, and a lot of times that's because the light's going through the ice, and you get kind of that greenish hint. So when you see the purple, it means you don't have quite as much ice. And that would make sense because in Florida it's a lot warmer, right? And obviously it has to be cold enough in the cloud for ice to form. So when you have the green, it means you've got a little bit more in the way of ice. And by the way, how does lightning form? That might be a good question too. It's kind of like a battery in the sky. So you've got all of those raindrops, the hail, it's all whizzing past each other in the cloud really fast. It's falling, it's rising, it's doing all of these things. And basically it's getting charged. So kind of like a, you know, when you rub your feet across the floor in the wintertime and you kind of get that static electricity. So same thing, all those little droplets are rubbing right by each other and they're getting charged up, and eventually you get lightning. So it goes for the opposite charges. And then of course you get thunder from there. Yep? Can it knock you out? If it's big enough. I mean, fortunately a lot of people will go inside as soon as they start seeing it, but I mean if you're getting, what'd you say? You've got a problem. Especially if it's grapefruit size hail like you get in Kansas. I mean, that's crazy. That's absolutely incredible. So it can really cause a lot of damage. Okay, right here. Okay, so heat lightning, I'll hear this a ton. So heat lightning is actually the same exact thing. The only difference is you're seeing it so far away that you can't hear the thunder. So somewhere there's thunder, you just can't hear it. So you're just seeing it because it's far away, and a lot of times you see that in the summertime. Right? So because it's usually warm out, people say, oh, it's heat lightning. It's actually just the same exact thing. You're just too far away to hear the thunder. Excellent question. Right here.
What's the biggest hail that's ever been?
Good question. This actually was, there was just a new record set a couple years ago, and I think it was actually in South Dakota. And I want to say it was somewhere between 7 and 9 inches in diameter. Yeah, so I mean 7 to 9 inches is big. And that was unusual. They had to go measure it, and someone had to stick it in their freezer so they could confirm how big it was. Because you know, you can't just say, oh, there was 7-inch hail and have someone instantly believe you. And that doesn't happen a lot. I mean, that's very, very unusual. And around here, we usually don't get much past an inch. But every once in a while, we'll get like golf ball size hail or something like that, and that will still do a number on your car. Question?
When I was in Sophia, lightning struck a tree and it exploded and caught fire.
Uh-huh.
Right behind us. How does it explode?
Okay, good question. So she was saying how she saw kind of a tree basically explode from the lightning. So remember how much energy is in lightning. Tons and tons of energy. I mean, you could power thousands of homes based on one lightning strike because there's so much energy involved in it. So the lightning, remember, is going to try to strike the tallest object it can find. So in this case, it was that tree. Okay, so trees get struck a lot, and people, if you're out in an open field, have you been told what to do if there's lightning? What do you think you would do if you're in a field? Okay, good, as low as you can, right. So you want to kind of get flat, you want to not be the tallest object, because if you are that tallest object, you better watch out. So the power in that lightning strike hit the tree, and it literally decimates it. The other thing is, there was a case that I covered this past summer as well, where lightning struck a tree. It went through the root system, so think of all the big roots in the trees. So the energy travels through the roots. It then hit a utility line that was buried, so like your phone line or something like that. And the house that someone was living in wasn't actually struck, but the charge followed the cord right from their driveway all the way into the house, and all the pictures blew off the wall. So this is why, have you heard people say don't use the phone during a thunderstorm? Anyone said that? And I know we don't have a lot of like hardwired phones now where there's actually a cord that sticks it in the wall, but that's why you don't use your phone during a thunderstorm, because the charge can follow all the way inside your house, even if your house isn't hit, and it can go inside that cord. If you're using a cordless phone, obviously it's fine. But same thing for water, because it can follow the piping right into your house, and obviously water and electricity aren't a good combination. So that's kind of the quick and dirty as to why you don't use corded phones or water while there's a thunderstorm. Question?
Lightning struck my grandparents' driveway.
Mm-hmm.
The entire driveway burst into flames.
Yeah, just totally blows it up, right? It's because there's so much power in that lightning. And this is why you'll hear people that were struck by lightning, they'll obviously have physical injuries, but oftentimes it's when they're outside and they are the tallest object. Okay, we're going to move on, but we'll take more questions as we go, because I want to talk about tornadoes. because tornadoes are closely related to thunderstorms. You need a thunderstorm to get a tornado, right? So this picture up here, that's actually Worcester, Massachusetts. Anyone been to Worcester lately? Central Massachusetts, you know where that is? Look how big that is. That's a big tornado, right? So most of the tornadoes that we see in the country are found in Tornado Alley, okay, which is kind of this highlighted area here, say North Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and you also get a lot of tornadoes in the south, so Alabama, kind of like a secondary tornado alley. But Massachusetts has tornadoes too. Usually they're a lot weaker, but in 1953, the Worcester tornado, as it's known, was an F4 or an F5. And remember how tornadoes are rated. Anyone know? F0 is the weakest, and then what's the highest you can go? Way in the back in the Bruin shirt. Yeah. Exactly, good. So F5 is as big as a tornado can get, it's as strong as it can get, and now we've kind of enhanced the Fujita scale, so we call it the EF scale. But in 1953 it was just regular Fs, so it was an F4, second highest you can be, and some research indicates it actually might have been an F5 in Massachusetts, very rare. 94 people died in that storm in 1953, so it's actually cracking the top 20 in terms of deadly tornadoes. And you think, it's Massachusetts, how does that happen? So in 1953, meteorologists really didn't know much about tornadoes at all. In fact, the National Weather Service, the one who issues the alerts, tornado warning, tornado watch, there was actually a mandate from their bosses saying, do not use the word tornado because it scares people too much. So the meteorologists at the National Weather Service got reports that there was this tornado on the ground, and people didn't know anything about tornadoes. And because the public wasn't warned about it, people kept going outside, ran to their neighbor's house, hey, look at this thing coming. Look at that. They didn't know how deadly it was. And that's why so many people died, because there wasn't warning and people didn't know the power of a tornado. It was so strong, in fact, that some of the debris from Worcester ended up at Blue Hill. You know Blue Hill, when you drive on 128, you can kind of see the little ski area there. So some of the debris from Worcester got lifted up in that tornado and thrown all the way to Blue Hill. That's how strong the storm was. And just in 2011, maybe you remember this, in Springfield, Mass. Anyone remember this? Remember that tornado? Okay. So that was an EF3. Still a big storm. Only killed about 3 people. Obviously, you don't want to see anyone die in a tornado, but the number was much less because people understood tornadoes more, and we had much better warning. So I went out to Western Mass. I was in Munson and Brimfield. And the one thing you could remember, well, it was incredible, first of all, because you see houses destroyed and cars kind of like in these big piles of debris. But any guesses about what smell I might have remembered distinctively? This is kind of a weird question.
Rubber?
Okay, rubber, good guess. Anyone else? What smell might you remember with a tornado in Massachusetts, right here? Okay, it wasn't gas. I'll give you a hint again. It involved trees. It smelled like pine. It smelled like a ton of Christmas trees, because there were so many trees down. We have so many trees around here that a whole forest basically got leveled by this storm, and it just was overwhelming smell of pine. So anyway, that was in 2011. So they do happen. It's fairly rare. In 1643, we learn a lot about the Pilgrims here, right? A lot. So in 1643, Massachusetts was the first state to actually see a tornado and say, hey, this is pretty neat, let's write it down. Obviously, tornadoes happened elsewhere before then, but we were the first ones to think it was interesting enough to write it down. Interesting enough, I should say. So that's kind of neat. Way back in the 1600s, they saw one of these tornadoes and they're like, hey, let's jot down a little note. Question?
Does it change like the power of a tornado when it goes in water?
Good question. Okay, so does the tornado strength change when you go over water? So it does change. First of all, when tornadoes are rated on the EF scale, they're rated based on the damage they cause, which is kind of hard, because if you have a super big tornado that just goes through a cornfield, it's hard to determine how strong the winds were, because all it's doing is ripping up corn. If it goes through a big town, though, it's a lot easier to see, okay, what types of buildings got damaged. Once it goes over water, there's no way of really knowing how strong it is, so it's called a waterspout at that point. And that's still very dangerous for boaters, obviously. You don't want to get close to that, because remember, this is a big swirling thing of wind and sucking up the water as well. Question about tornadoes?
Does it help like create a whirlpool in the water?
It does. It's not terribly dramatic, but remember, just like it's an area of low pressure basically. So remember, which way do we say the winds blow in the low? Counterclockwise, right? So it's blowing that way, and you do get a little bit of a swirl on the water, but it's more so the gusty wind that's the problem. Even if you're not really that close to the water spout, you can still be in trouble if you're a boater because the winds will expand elsewhere. All right, one last question on tornadoes, and then if we have time, we'll come back right here.
Has anyone survived a tornado?
Yes, and the question was, has anyone survived a tornado? Lots of people survive a tornado. If a tornado is heading towards your house, tornado warning is issued. On TV, you'll hear the meteorologist say, go to the lowest level of your house, right? Basement, because you want to be underground. If you don't have a basement, where would you go? Good, okay, perfect. Bathroom. Anyone know why you go to the bathroom? Right, you don't want to go where there's windows, and oftentimes bathrooms don't. Any other reasons you can think of? Right here. I'm sorry? Leaving your house? If you have a bathroom or a basement, you want to go inside. You don't want to try to outrun the tornado. But the reason you go to the bathroom, and this is weird, but think of all the pipes in your bathroom, right? You've got lots of pipes that bring the water in, for the toilet, for the sink, for the shower. All that piping makes the walls stronger on the outside. And there have been cases in the plains where people go to their bathroom, they'll cover up their head, the tornado will hit their house, and I mean, these are crazy, crazy stories, but someone's bathtub will actually be picked up with them inside it. They'll be picked up and they'll be deposited a couple of miles away, totally fine. I mean, not everyone, that doesn't happen to everyone, but I mean, it's crazy. Or there'll be cases where there's little babies and you think, okay, how is this baby going to survive winds close to 200 miles per hour and all that debris that's swirling around? But the baby will be just lifted up and, you know, a police officer will find this crying baby in the mud. I mean, it's just crazy stuff. You can't assume that that's going to be the case. So that's why you have to take these precautions and know what to do. All right, I lied. One more question. In the orange. Okay, sorry, I didn't hear you. What'd you say? Under a mattress is good, yep. And a lot of people, when they get in the bathtub, they'll put a mattress or pillows over them. And the other thing that a lot of people are now doing in the South in particular, they did this after a lot of tornadoes in 2011, is they started putting helmets on, which, well, it sounds silly, right? But the biggest issue with the tornado is all of the debris that's in it. So as these tornadoes are hitting houses, think of all the wood, all the nails. There's a lot of bad stuff flying through the air with a tornado. So people put a helmet on because it's going to block your head, obviously, which is very important. So it's crazy stuff. We don't see a lot of them here, but they do happen. Okay, we also have to talk about hurricanes because this is another thing that we're very aware of in the ocean. Hurricane season runs June through November. Average is about 11 or 12 named storms a year. And I say named because remember, some of these do get names, right? You have to have a tropical storm before it gets a name. The weakest tropical anything is called the tropical depression. Then the next step is a storm. That's where it gets its name. And then you go category 1 through 5, 5 being the worst. For a hurricane to form, you need a lot of warm water. When I say warm water, I mean I'm talking warm. 80-degree water temperature is ideal for hurricanes. This is why they form in the Caribbean. They come up the coastline, and typically they weaken when they come up the coast because obviously our water is not 80 degrees. But they follow the Gulf Stream. You've heard of the Gulf Stream before? That ribbon of warm water that kind of takes you right from the coast of Florida, offshore of New England. So if a storm hits that Gulf Stream and does follow the narrow little ribbon of warmth, it can maintain its strength. As the storms come up the coastline, they tend to accelerate as well. So they're going much faster when they get here. And like I said, those storms are named, and if it's a really bad storm, they'll retire the name. They don't want another Hurricane Katrina, for example, coming to New Orleans because they're afraid people living there would automatically assume it's going to be just like the past Hurricane Katrina, or it could bring bad memories and things like that. So the names go boy, girl. Okay, they alternate, and they recycle about every 6 years or so. There's Katrina. There's a view of Katrina, and that was really an incredible storm from 2005. This is 1938. This is another one of those ones that really impacted New England significantly. Maybe talk to your grandparents about this one. My grandfather always tells me about his 1938 experience, how he was 8 and his parents told him to go shut the shutters upstairs and it was blowing everywhere, and I mean, he loves that story. But it was a big storm. That was the benchmark storm. It's called the Long Island Express, and this is another one where in 1938 meteorology was so bad that no one knew a hurricane was coming. So think about this. It's September. You just started school, but you're not quite done with summer vacation yet, right? You want another beach day? So a lot of people, it was a Friday, they went to the beach, they're getting off the school bus, like trying to be outside, kind of nice. They see the storm clouds coming and they're like, oh, that's weird. You know, we heard about the storm, but it's curving out to sea, so what could this be? Storm comes in, wallops, and I mean wallops, Rhode Island, Long Island, parts of Massachusetts, slams ashore as a Category 3 storm with no warning. Okay, Category 3 hurricane on your doorstep, you didn't know it was coming. Huge push of water comes into New England. Providence, Rhode Island, maybe you've been to Providence. 20 feet of water in downtown Providence because all of the water got pushed ashore by the very strong winds. Same thing happened on Cape Cod and Buzzards Bay. And again, hundreds of people died because they didn't know it was happening. Now, obviously, as a meteorologist, we still have times where we're wrong, definitely. The difference is it would be virtually impossible in today's day and age with today's technology for a hurricane to surprise us because now we have things like radar. We have satellites in the sky, right? In 1938, you had no satellite beaming down to say, hey, there's a big storm blowing right towards you. And these storms can still cause problems. Think about Hurricane Sandy. You know about Sandy? So it kind of took that weird left-hand turn and plowed into New York City. We knew that was coming. Still caused a ton of damage. So just because we know it's coming doesn't mean there aren't big problems. We just have advance warning. And the problem now is so many people are saying, oh, the coastline is so lovely. Let's build right on the water. But when these storms come, now there's more homes in the way, more people in the way. So it's causing a lot more damage. Okay, questions about hurricanes. Let's see, who haven't I gotten to yet? Oh, right here.
If there was Katrina and then Sandy, was there anyone in between? Because I gotta say,
Mm-hmm.
oh boy.
Yep, there were a lot. So Katrina was in 2005, Sandy was in 2011, and each year there's several storms. We haven't had a lot of bad ones hit the US in a long time, to be honest. Sandy was a bad one. Irene came in 2011 as well, and that actually brought epic flooding to Vermont. And to this day, the state is still recovering from Irene. And you might say, well, wait, Vermont's inland. How does that happen? So there are kind of two sides to every hurricane if you think about this. If there's a hurricane track going like that, so the hurricane's traveling up this way, on the left-hand side you get buckets of rain, just buckets and buckets of rain. On the right-hand side you get the gusty winds. So if you're on the left-hand side of that storm, you're going to get a ton of water and not so much wind. If you're on the right-hand side, you're going to get a ton of wind and not so much water. Yes?
Did you retire the name Andrew from like that storm that hit Florida?
Which one? Do you remember which one?
It was like down in Florida, it was like Andrew.
Oh, Andrew. Andrew was in 1992. Andrew is definitely retired. Done. Won't see another Andrew again. Florida has it's actually like very disconcerting for people in Florida. There have not been many hurricanes to hit Florida in a long, long time, or major hurricanes to hit the US, in fact. So there's kind of this general uneasiness that there's going to be a big one coming somewhere along the way because there hasn't been one in the past couple of years. All right, we're going to keep going, but like I said, I'll come back for more questions at the end. I just want to touch on this briefly. I want to show you a little bit about how you observe the weather because obviously this is critical. So you have these weather stations. So down here you have a rain gauge, kind of a bucket where the rain falls into, measures how much rain, and then you might know the anemometer on the top. That's for the wind where it spins around, points in different directions, and then all of that often gets fed back to one central station. So that's how you actually observe it. How about forecasting the weather? And this is what I spend most of my time on. So a lot of people don't really understand because you only see the TV meteorologist for what? 5 minutes a newscast, maybe? A couple times here and there, and you're like, what a great job. Roll in and you're there for 5 minutes and that's it, right? So I actually get in for my shift several hours before the first newscast because I have to forecast the weather and then I have to make all of those graphics. So for example, during the morning shift, I've been doing mornings recently. So I would get to work, wake up at 2 a.m., get to work at 3 a.m. Newscast starts at 5 a.m. So during those 2 hours, I'm looking at things like this. So this is a computer model. Basically, all of that observational data, so from the weather stations like that, it gets fed into these supercomputers in Washington, D.C., and in Europe, too. And these supercomputers are doing a ton of different equations. Remember how much calculus I said I had to do in college? So the computers are doing all of that calculus. Fortunately, I don't have to do it, but obviously I had to learn how to do it. But the computer model will do all those calculations, and it spits out different scenarios. So I look at a ton of different models, usually up to a dozen sometimes, and each model is giving a different solution on what the forecast is going to be. It's my job as the human being to say, okay, this one looks right, this looks reasonable, or to kind of average them out. That's where the hardest part is, and this is why, again, you might say, okay, well, Channel 5 says we're going to get 12 inches, Channel 7 says we're going to get 30 inches, and Channel 4 says we're going to get 6 inches. What the heck is up with that? If I've heard that question once, I've heard it a million times. Why are all the TV stations different? It's because every meteorologist is looking at the same data but forming their own opinions. So this is what's happening at about, let's say 15,000 feet or so. This is an output of that. And then you can look at different layers of the atmosphere, right? So I can look at 15,000 feet. I can look at what's happening at the surface. So in this case, See that big L right off the coastline? So that means there's a storm off the coastline in this particular model. And then the greens and the blues, you see that? So that's the model telling us where it thinks it's going to be raining and snowing and things like that. So that's kind of just a real quick and dirty version of what to look for. And then we also have this kind of numerical output is what it's called. It's just a bunch of numbers. So there's a line for temperature there. There's a line for the dew point, which is the moisture, how muggy it feels, for the wind, for the clouds. All of that is also there. And we look at all of this information. We make weather graphics, and then we go on air and present the forecast and hope it's right. And if it's not, people tell us. All right, so we've still got about 15 minutes, so now I've left this for just kind of questions. We can talk about anything you want, storms, TV, whatever you have. We'll just answer as many questions as I can. Right here.
Is it hard to remember like where the things are? Because it's just like a blank.
It is.
thing.
Yeah, excellent question. So if you remember, let me go back to the beginning. And this is another question I get a lot. Okay, so that's me standing in front of a green wall. So when I'm actually doing the weather, there's nothing behind me other than that green, and the weather graphics I've made are basically being put behind me by a graphic system, by a computer basically. But if you look very carefully, there's a little TV right there, and there's a TV in front of me underneath the camera. So I'm looking at that. So when I turn and it looks like I'm looking at the wall, I'm actually looking at the little monitor on the side, so I can see myself pointing. I don't think about it that much. It's weird. It's a weird thing, and I can't tell you how I do it. It's just like happens. I have no good answer. Okay, right here.
What's the worst type of storm?
Worst type of storm, everyone probably has a different opinion. For us, the worst type of storm are probably nor'easters, because we see those most. And we saw a lot of damage at the coastline this year. So Marshfield and Situate, there were some seawall collapses, right? With those strong northeast winds that pound the coastline. So around here, that's probably our worst type of weather. They can cut new holes in the beaches, down on Cape Cod, and down on the Vineyard too. You get those new holes that develop in the sand, right? I don't know, maybe anyone go to Chatham? Or down to like Edgartown on Martha's Vineyard? So if you know the beach very well down there, you might go down one summer and you're like, what the heck is this thing? It can literally, these storms can cut new paths between the beach. But if you go out to the plains, they're going to say tornadoes. If you go down to the Gulf states, they're probably going to say hurricanes are the worst. They all cause different types of damage, and they're all bad just in their own way. Okay, over here. Yep. Yes, there's no green in my wardrobe allowed. So if I wore green, because basically what the computer does is anywhere it sees green, it puts the graphic behind me. So if I were to wear your green shirt, you've got like kind of the green outline there, or even green jacket here, what would happen is you would see the map over my body basically, and you'd only see my head. So that's why you don't really see many meteorologists wearing green. And in some stations they're blue, which is horrible because I have a lot of blue in my wardrobe. So I'd be out of luck. So yes, definitely can only wear certain colors. Yes?
What is like the most deadly tornado you've been?
Most deadly tornado is in the 1970s. There was a big outbreak in Ohio, Indiana. I don't know the number of people that died, but that was particularly deadly. And in 2011 in Alabama, maybe you remember this, there was a huge outbreak of tornadoes, Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, and then towards Huntsville as well. That was very, very deadly. Not necessarily from one storm, but from this outbreak of storms. So you have tornado after tornado kind of going through the same area over and over again. And I was in Alabama in 2011 just after those storms, and the damage was absolutely incredible. I mean, whole blocks just completely gone. And it's very scary to hear the stories from people who were living through that, because they hear the sirens go off, the tornado sirens that often go off. And they hear it go off over and over again, and you just never know if it's going to be your house or not. And there were really some terrible stories. Okay, who have I not heard from yet? Have I heard? I don't think I've heard from you yet. Right there, yep.
What's the difference between a hurricane and typhoon?
Oh, very good question. Okay, so a hurricane forms in the Atlantic or in the Pacific, and then a typhoon happens basically once you get in the Pacific side, but closer to Asia. So it just forms in a different portion of the ocean. So it's the same exact thing from a weather standpoint, it just means it forms in a different spot. So something that's going to hit Japan, for example, or the Philippines will be a typhoon. It's the same thing as a hurricane, but we call it a hurricane, they call it a typhoon. Things that hit Australia, 2 big cyclones, they call them cyclones, just hit Australia. That was pretty rare, and that just happened not that long ago, actually. Right here.
How do you, what if you don't point to the right thing on like the green board?
Good question. So if I don't point to the right thing, then everyone at home, because you can see the graphics that I can't, so you're going to be making fun of me, saying like, you just pointed to the wrong thing, which I'm sure happens every once in a while. Entertainment, you know? Okay, right there. Yes? Okay, good question. So a tsunami isn't totally weather related, but it's very much science related. That starts with an earthquake. And the other thing I'll point out about being a meteorologist at a TV station is that we are the only scientist in the building. So I like to consider ourselves more of like a station scientist, because if there's a tsunami coming, if there's an earthquake, if there's a solar storm, if there's anything remotely sciencey, you bet the weather office phone is going to be ringing, because no one else in the building knows what the heck's going on. So we're like the fallback on all things science. Anyway, so a tsunami, there's an earthquake underwater that forms, and you might know that earthquakes form as plates move. Big chunks of the earth basically kind of slide, or they'll pop up and one will slide down. You know, something happens where the earth kind of gets a little bit disheveled. And underwater what happens is if they slide or if they pop up, all of the water that's above the seafloor also gets pushed up. So you have this big bubble of water that gets pushed up, and then it creates basically a big wave. And that wave will travel in all directions, eventually reaching shore. If you're on the water, interestingly, in a boat, you're not going to know what you're going over. It just seems like a wave. But because when you get near the coastline, you know how the coastline slants a little bit? So think about when you're at the beach. You kind of keep walking and it gets deeper and it gets deeper and it gets deeper, right? So it's kind of this slope. Well, as the water goes up that slope, it gets higher and higher. Basically, it forces the water to get higher, and then you get that huge wave that crashes ashore and then moves inland. So it starts with the earthquake, and then it gets amplified, or kind of bigger and bigger as it gets closer to the coastline. Does that help? Make sense? Okay. Let's see here, right here.
What TV station did you like working on?
So we were on Fox and ABC in Vermont, and that was great. Lots of fun. I got to do, what I really liked about that is I did mornings, I did nights for a while, I did weekends, and then I also got to report. So I got to report on kind of weather-related stories. So one of the stories I just did was, you know, the medical helicopters that sometimes will come after a bad car accident or something like that? So I got to fly in one of those to see how the winter weather impacts their response. So they can't fly when it's snowy or when there's ice. So they actually took me up in the helicopter to show me that. That was kind of neat. So I love that part of my job. But Channel 5 was really exciting because obviously I grew up here, and it's fun to work where you live, in the purple.
How do you get to take all like
The pictures that I showed you? A lot of those I didn't take. A lot of those people will sent to me. So on my Facebook page, I get a lot of viewers that love sending in their pictures. So people are always out there documenting the weather. Now, you have to be careful, though, because if you get a big tornado, you want to make sure you're a safe distance away. So you have to make sure the storm is traveling away from you before you stop to take pictures. But there's always a lot of people out there taking excellent pictures, and it's a lot easier with technology. Okay, question?
How does a tornado like end, like stop?
Excellent question. Okay, so how does a tornado end? Good question, right? It's like going, going, going. Tornado formation is very, very complicated. There's a lot of research. People get paid a lot of money. They spend their whole life trying to figure out how a tornado forms and how it ends. Basically, what ends up happening is, remember what I said for clouds? Same goes for tornado. You need to have rising air, right? So at some point, and the reasons are still a little bit blurry, but at some point the air kind of stops rising and you get cold air from above in the cloud, because remember it's colder the higher up you go. So that cold air eventually wins out, we like to say, and eventually more cold air is coming down than warm air is going up. So as soon as that balance is kind of broken, as soon as there's more cold air coming out of the storm than there is warm air going in, the tornado's done. And it's hard, there's really not a good answer now on why that happens. That's why they're spending so much money trying to research that. It's a very complicated topic, but it has to do with the cold air coming down, it squashes it, yes.
What's the most deadly kind of storm?
Deadly, so remember we said flash flooding. Weird, right? You think, okay, tornadoes, hurricanes, all of that stuff. Heat, hot weather, and flash flooding actually kill the most people which I think a lot of people are surprised to hear. Because when it's really hot, people have like heat stroke if you're not in the AC, and that can kill a lot of people. There was a big heat issue in, I believe it was 2003 in Europe. Hundreds of people died, and statistically it kills more people than tornadoes and hurricanes. Because think about it, you don't get as many of those, right? In the pink right here.
When a tornado stops, does it just stop abruptly, or does it?
Sometimes it is very abrupt. Sometimes you'll have the storm chasers out there and they'll have the live cameras on it, and it will 1 minute raging, raging, raging. Sometimes it kind of peters out and it looks like it's getting weaker, and sometimes it just done, boom. And this is why there's still so much research going on, because there aren't good answers as to when a storm is going to stop. And obviously if we could say, okay, great, the storm's going to stop here, it would make our life a lot easier, but we don't know that. Okay, back there in the gray. Yep.
How do heat waves form?
Heat waves. All right, so we just said heat waves claim a lot of lives. And remember that big area of high pressure we were talking about? High pressure means the air is sinking. It means kind of quiet weather. When you get one of those big highs parked over you in the summertime, it's just going to bake. Literally just bakes. So you need something that doesn't move a lot. So a big high pressure that's over you, just like in the winter how it can keep the cold locked in place, a high pressure will keep the heat locked in place. And that's what's happening in the west. So if you've heard about the big drought on the west coast, well, we've been so cold and snowy, big area of high pressure out over the west has mostly kept them dry and much, much above average. Denver, a couple weeks ago, we were 10 degrees or something crazy like that. Denver was 70 because of this big area of high pressure that was overhead. So usually when you get cold and snow somewhere, it's warm elsewhere. Alaska was really warm. There was a day a couple weeks ago where it was 33 below zero in Vermont. Okay, 33 degrees below zero. And in Barrow, Alaska, at the very northern tip of Alaska, so in the Arctic Circle, okay, it was 4 degrees above. 4 degrees above zero in the Arctic Circle, 33 below zero in our viewing area in Vermont. People didn't really, they thought it was interesting, but it was one of those real slap in the face moments when it's like, okay, go to Alaska for your warmth. Okay, let's see, right here. Yes, so today I'm off and I'm actually interviewing for new jobs. I'm flying out for an interview this afternoon, in fact. But my most recent shift, I was doing mornings. So I did the morning show from 5 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock. And that's hard, not only because it's really early in the morning, but you also are on a lot in the morning. So if you watch the morning news with your parents, you'll probably notice how much the meteorologist is on. It's usually every 5 minutes. So it just makes it really hard to eat. If you have to go to the bathroom, it's really hard because you have to pee in 30 seconds. So it's a good challenge. But morning show most recently, and before that I did nights. So I have done basically both schedules. Okay, in the back.
What was your most watched show?
Okay, so my most watched show, it's always when there's bad weather. You can see in the ratings, we get the ratings every day, and you can see the trends basically immediately. And almost always, if there's a big spike in the ratings, which is good for me, it's because of weather. So people will tune in for the forecast. So usually the day before and the day of a storm, in the morning, for example, huge spike in the ratings, meaning more people watching when there's storm, because everyone wakes up, you want to see if your school's closed, you want to see if it's going to take you longer to get to school. In December of 2013, there was also an ice storm in Vermont. So a ton of that freezing rain, we got an inch of ice, knocked out power to tens of thousands of people, and I was actually the only meteorologist at the TV station. So the big joke is that I always have a blow-up mattress in my trunk in case I have to sleep over, and I slept over for that one. Ton of people watch that as well because they're all inside, there's nothing else to do other than watch the weather. So fortunately, it's good job security for me. Right here.
Do other storms besides hurricanes have names?
This is a very interesting question. Do other storms other than hurricanes have names? So have you heard kind of winter storms kind of getting names lately? Anyone?
Yeah.
So this is like a major debate in the weather world. Only the Weather Channel, okay? So the Weather Channel is the only TV outlet, the only media source that names storms in the winter. The National Weather Service, so the government basically, says we don't name winter storms. I don't name winter storms because it gets confusing. It's not as easy to name it, but the Weather Channel, more or less for publicity and social media purposes, does name storms, but that's very unofficial. So that's only the Weather Channel. Let's see, who haven't I talked to yet? I don't think I've heard from you yet.
What was the biggest hurricane ever?
Biggest hurricane ever? We don't have a lot of good data on some of the biggest storms. So there was a big storm in 1927, but again, we didn't have a lot of things to record it. In modern times, Andrew was a biggie in 92. We talked about that. Katrina was huge in 2005. Wilma and Rita were big ones. And there's a couple different ways you can rate this. You can rate storms based on number of deaths, strongest winds, or pressure. Remember we talked about pressure? The stronger a storm is, the lower the pressure. Wilma was the all-time lowest pressure in the Atlantic in 2005 as well. But Sandy also broke records for having the lowest pressure in the North Atlantic, so close to us basically. Sandy was an incredible storm, absolutely incredible. And I think we're almost into 11, so maybe one more question here. We'll go all the way to the back. I have never been inside a tornado. I've only seen the aftermath in Alabama and then again in western Massachusetts. And the odds of seeing one are pretty low because they happen in such a small area. I mean, there are cases where a tornado will go, let's say it went through Hingham, this side of East School might be fine and the other side might be blown to pieces. It's so small, so the odds are very low. So I've never seen one in person, not in a real hurry to, but the aftermath is very impressive. Okay, so I think we'll kind of leave it there at 11 o'clock, hopefully. Thank you very much for all of your great questions. My email address will be on there too, so if you're doing some lessons, you have more questions, always email me. Happy to answer those. I love talking about weather. And hopefully some of you guys will get interested too in either weather or science or whatever. And know it's totally okay to be a nerd, because I still totally am, and I love it. All right, thank you.
Thank you.